We often model human learning as a clean, purely computational machine, a rigid network where data moves from input to output based solely on logic. Under this framework, emotional states are treated as environmental noise or mechanical friction that disrupts the cognitive gears. But neurobiology and behavioral psychology reveal a different architecture. Emotion functions as the primary structural regulatory mechanism of human cognition. When the biological pathways associated with feeling are deactivated, the logic circuits cannot initiate, process, or store new data. Emotion acts as the mechanical engine driving the entire cognitive system. Psychologists classify a specific subset of cognitive triggers as intellectual emotions. The primary ones are curiosity, surprise, doubt, and guessing. We can visualize how these specific emotions function as distinct mechanical valves within a rigid cognitive pipeline. This pipeline operates across 4 structural stages: initiation, processing, resolution, and storage. Mapping the mechanics of this pipeline provides the technical framework for systematically engineering effective learning environments. The system begins with sensory input, driven by a baseline biological need for new information, a state we define as curiosity. Raw data only enters the active cognitive pipeline when it hits the first mechanical valve, surprise. Immanuel Kant analyzed this exact moment, noting that surprise initially acts as a brake. It halts the passive play of thought, creating a brief, unpleasant psychological friction. That initial friction triggers a mobilization of cognitive resources toward the new data. The pressure releases into a rush of unexpected ideas, resolving into a pleasant psychological state. Surprise operates as an orienting function. It forces consciousness to notice elements of the environment that previously slipped past its attention. It is an aggressive, forced interrupt mechanism required to initiate cognitive work. The mechanical necessity of these intellectual emotions has been debated for millennia, long before the advent of modern neuroscience. Plato explicitly recorded the existence of specific mental pleasures tightly bound to the intellect. His student, Aristotle, established the foundational axiom that the process of cognition begins with the emotion of surprise. René Descartes refined this further in his text, The Passions of the Soul. He elevated surprise to the primary position among the 6 core human passions because of its critical orienting power. Classical philosophy identified the structural necessity of these cognitive valves centuries before modern psychology possessed the tools to empirically measure them. Once data clears the initial interrupt of surprise, it enters the processing chamber. Here, it encounters the second major valve, doubt. Descartes argued that doubt is not a failure of knowledge. He called it the mother of truth, the essential active engine that stresses incoming information and drives the thought process. The intensity of that cognitive engine is governed by a specific internal metric known as the student's level of aspiration. The level of aspiration represents a person's underlying motives, manifested by the degree of difficulty of the goals they voluntarily set for themselves. This animation illustrates how psychologists empirically measure this trait. They construct an array of tasks, ranked sequentially from left to right by increasing degrees of difficulty. Subjects are then asked to voluntarily select a sequence of tasks to perform from anywhere within this array. The difficulty threshold a subject locks onto reveals their underlying motivational structure, indicating how much cognitive doubt they are willing to endure. The data suggests that cognitive processing depth is regulated by this quantifiable emotional variable, the student's personal ambition. After a data node has been stressed by doubt and analyzed according to the student's ambition, it nears the end of the processing phase. The final valve before the system writes the data to memory is the emotion of guessing. Guessing acts as a biological signal indicating that a new semantic construct has taken shape in the brain. This specific emotion generates a distinct feeling of confidence or lingering hesitation regarding whether the cognitive pathways taken to reach this point were correct. Intellectual effort doesn't passively fade out. It is actively terminated by a distinct emotional signal of resolution. The final stage of the pipeline is long-term storage, a process dependent on the overarching emotional background present during learning. This relies on the formation of affective complexes, a mechanism where raw information physically binds to pleasant or unpleasant emotional states to aid retention. In a foundational memory experiment, subjects memorized meaningless strings of syllables, shown as plain text. Researchers then paired these nonsense syllables with photographs of highly attractive or highly unattractive faces. The data showed a massive statistical spike. Meaningless words bound to high-valence emotional imagery significantly outperformed those paired with neutral faces. A positive mood also increases a subject's raw output, yielding higher persistence and a greater volume of solved tasks. Emotional valence acts as a biological anchor that dictates how much data the brain retains. This diagram represents the completed cognitive pipeline. Sensory input is interrupted by surprise, stressed through doubt, gated by aspiration, resolved by guessing, and locked into storage via affective complexes. Examined as a whole, historical philosophical theory reflects the exact same mechanics found in modern empirical data. Emotional and cognitive processes do not run on parallel, isolated tracks. They form a singular, interdependent biological system. For instructional design, this dictates an operational reality. Emotional engagement must be engineered as a structural requirement. Bypassing these biological valves limits self-esteem, suppresses their level of aspiration, and degrades actual data retention. The calibration of emotional states defines the operational limits of human learning.